Hi and welcome to True Crime with Emma Kenny. Note that I'm wearing a bright purple hoodie with SOS on. Yes, it's not my usual kind of wear, but I've just been supporting the charity Silence of Suicide. I threw myself out of a plane at 14,500 feet at the weekend just to raise awareness and also to try and get volunteers. So if you're in the UK and you want to volunteer to be a helpliner, that would be really, really helpful. I'm somebody who was affected by suicide. My dad killed himself, which is terrible and something that I'm still dealing with. So anything that you guys can do to bring awareness and help, that would be awesome. But let's get on with the true crime that we're going to be covering today. As I always say, please subscribe because it makes a massive difference. Comment, like, of course. I love seeing your comments, and loads of you give me added value when you respond. You literally give me added value. You'll add things in that I didn't know. Today's case is one that actually I found out about when I was listening to the Monster podcast. I was kind of listening to a case that really sparked my interest, because it's not often that you just instantly know, I'm dealing with a complete psychopath here. There is no need for a psychological evaluation. There is no need for a psychiatric assessment. This person is pure and simple psychopath, just like waiting to erupt. So the case that I'm going to be talking about today is Joel Guy Jr. He is currently serving time inside, which I'll go into later, for parricide. When we talk about parricide, what we mean is he killed his parents. And he didn't just kill his parents, he killed them in a very specific way. There are lots of reasons why I want to cover this case. One is it's pretty recent, and the second is it is so gruesome. And there is no real reasoning behind why it happened. That's one of the things that always gets me, when there's a real chill of how does a child who's brought up by their parents and not brought up in abuse and not brought up in some horribly intolerable situation where you kind of go, can kind of see where the rage had come from. This guy, no reasons at all. And it will become clear as we go through it. Also, when we talk about psychopaths, one of the traits that they often have, and I know because you watch a lot of crime, you'll already know this, but let's just say it anyway, is arrogance. They believe that they are better than, greater than, more capable than everyone else. So you'll see by some of his behaviors that I go into afterwards that he perfectly fits this kind of analysis. So who was Joel Guy Jr.? Well, we don't know loads about him. I've been through the court case. I have listened to testimonies of his friend, note the word friend, and also his family members. So I can kind of give you my understanding and interpretation of who he was. But he was born to Joel Michael Guy Sr., so obviously named after his father, and he was also born to Lisa Guy. Now, this relationship was a second relationship because his father actually was married before this twice to the same woman. The first time they got married, they were married for like a year. The second time they got married, they had 3 children. So this means that Guy Jr. had 3 half-sisters, basically. His father was a pipeline engineer, so he had a good job. He provided really, really well for the family. And his mother worked at Jacobs Engineering in Oak Ridge. And I'll tell you a little bit more about his mother's job later on and how it's mind-blowing when you imagine what he did to her and what she was doing for him. Just keep that in mind. Because when I think about parricide, I'm always thinking about, okay, what could be the reasoning behind a child turning on their parents? And not just turning on their parents. When I go through the incremental way that he actually murdered them, just keep in mind his background and the kind of extension of resources that his family were affording him. So I guess one of the things that we need to identify is who was Guy Jr. growing up? And as I said, there's very limited information. However, one of the things that's very clear is he was an outsider. He wasn't somebody who had great social skills. He was very bright academically, which is surprising when you find out how he committed the crime later on. But like I said, arrogance is always a problem where crime is concerned. But his half-sisters said, they never really made an effort with them when they would see him, because they used to go and spend a month in the summer holidays with his mother. And what's really sad is when you listen in court to Guy Jr.'s half-sisters talking about his mother, to their stepmother. Let's be honest, a lot of stepmothers, they're not necessarily great with kids because, you know, they come into relationships later, there are problems dividing attention, they have their own kids and so on and so forth. Not the case in this family. In fact, one of his daughters said that when she used to visit her stepmom, it used to feel like the Waltons. She would have a month with her, and during that period of time, she would provide them with really beautiful home-cooked meals. It felt like she had like two parents, which was really important to her. And she modelled herself, not just as a woman, but as a mother on her stepmom. Because she came from a single-parent family, and it's really hard in a single-parent family. She wasn't denying that her mother was a loving parent, but she was acknowledging that that stepmother that could have been fractious, that could have been problematic, wasn't. She was the opposite. She made them feel really safe. Candy was stacked in the cupboards, walking in every day after days out together, eating as a family. She wanted to even walk around holding a cup the same way that her stepmother used to walk around holding a cup. So this is painting a picture of a mother who was loving as a stepmother too, and we're giving insight because they were there for a month. If you're going to see abuse, dangerous scenarios, violence, if you're going to see aggression, you're going to see it within a month. That never happened. So again, an insight into the fact that this boy is being brought up in a home full of love and full of resources. He never went without. So much so that his sisters were pretty jealous of him. They might have been half sisters, they might have only got to go for a month, but you know, to them, his life was beautiful, it was gold plated, but he made no effort with them. So most of the time he would just spend time by himself. He was very solitude and reclusive orientated. And because of that, we can kind of build that picture again. What's going on with his communication capacity? Now, on one level, we could say he's a really bad communicator. Actually, I've seen him interviewed. I don't buy that. What I would say is he believes that he is better than people. I would also add to that he maybe felt resentful of sharing resources with his half-sisters. And that's not unusual. A lot of people who are in step families have resentments because their maternal or paternal parent is related to other kids and they struggle with that. So I think he probably avoided them more because he saw them as a drain on the resources that he felt and clearly believed entitled to, which is something you'll really learn about as we go on through this case. Again, we have an insight into Guy Jr.'s lack of family connection and community because they have a WhatsApp group, a text message group, which is all about banter and fun and family connection, and he doesn't get involved. Now, on one level you can say, yeah, well, a lot of us are in like a billion groups these days. Who isn't in a billion groups? Like we've all moved to Telegram, but we're still on WhatsApp. You know, we don't want anybody to know anything, but we're still kind of in the normal groups. That's how it works at the moment, yeah? But if it's your family, there's almost like an unsaid expectation, isn't there? That you're going to be connected, and he avoids it. Again, what is that saying about him? On one level, you could argue, well, maybe he felt alienated, but no. Not in my opinion. This isn't that he feels alienated, it's that he feels exclusive. He feels exclusive to that group. So his mother and father, he sees them as his direct link and connection. And he sees the rest of the family a bit like baggage, you know, something that could be happily dumped. And when I talk about how outside of that family he was, you know, his half-sister had kids, and she doesn't even think that he knew the names. I mean, that is pretty low bar regarding the kind of connection you have with your family. I mean, I'm all for not knowing the friends of friends' partners. I get that, you know. I don't always know people's husbands' names or wives' names, but man, you know, my family, even the ones I don't see, I know the kids' names. So it's giving you this understanding that he's not really interested in family at all. There's another little piece of the puzzle that I found out when I was reading newspaper clippings, because apart from watching the trial, which is long, and I'm going to put excerpts of it in here and I'm going to put links to it so you can kind of have a look, because it is really interesting, mostly for his demeanor. His demeanor is crazy still and crazy composed for what we're going to talk about and the content I'm going to share with you. His parents kept his childhood belongings in a bedroom when he'd left home. So they kept his belongings, they looked after them. He was obviously somebody, memory-wise, that they wanted to hold true. Because you do that, don't you? You know, I do it with my kids' toys. I look at them and I'm like, oh, it was really nice when they were 2 and they didn't get so huge and make so much mess. That's the way that you are as a parent. They connect you. They're wonderful triggers for memories. So we know that they had this existing and long-standing love of him. They even had like TY Beanie Babies, which they kept when he moved out. Just demonstrates the kind of love and care that they had for him. And I'm telling you all of this because I think it's really important to put together the pieces of a puzzle that can present a completely different result than we would ever imagine. Because right now, all we have is a boy who was brought up, loved desperately by his parents, provided for as a child, memorialized in his toys, and even though he spent very little time with his other family members, to all intents and purposes, he really did not stand out, aside from the fact that he was quite isolated. But hey, a lot of kids play on their own. A lot of kids are solitude-based, particularly teenage boys. So at this point, we're still not seeing anything extraordinary about his behavior. Like I said, I think a healthy amount of arrogance, but that's just my opinion. When Guy was growing up, he actually went to a school for the academic and gifted. So that demonstrates a level of academic attainment, right? It shows you that he was very bright. And he was somebody who obviously stood out in that way. And again, I think when you are a very bright psychopath, again, that arrogant level can be really fostered. People are proud of you for going. People see you as different. People see you as somebody who can attain great levels. But also, it means there are expectations. But expectations can also be a cross to bear. I mean, some of you listening have probably had a parent who really wants something for you. And it's not that you don't want to make them proud, but you maybe have a completely different idea and expectation of what you want. And that can apply pressure. So it may be that when he was going down this road of being academically gifted, there were some pressures for him to succeed. And I always think when kids go to schools that are like that they're kind of aiming for doctor, lawyer, some kind of high level job, which is all about their strength of mind. So certainly at this point, we would imagine that that was a direction that probably his family were even thinking he'd take. During the time at school, he was not in the popular group of kids. In fact, he was very much on the outside, and he only really had one friend, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, because it's quite emotional, actually. And again, I draw your attention to watching the court case, because you will actually see his high school friend. But even he admits that he was a loner to some degree. He was a close friend, but he wasn't somebody that people gravitated and warmed to. Watch him in court. You'll understand why. I have some theories that I'm going to talk about at the end regarding what I think might have been going on for Guy Jr., regarding his own issues interpersonally, but also on a personal level. And that's just from watching the footage and the relationship that he had with his friend. But you can draw your own conclusions on that. It's just something that is sticking with me. And when something sticks, I always think it's for a reason. So as I said, Guy Jr. went to school for the gifted. It was actually a boarding school as well. And he lived with a guy called Michael McCracken whilst he was there. And this school itself was for the gifted kids. It was math, science and the arts. Boarding school is always one of those places, isn't it? Where I have a few issues around it. I'm sure that some of you have been to boarding school, and I'm not going to be negative about it, but I think it takes a certain kind of resilience to survive those kind of places. Personally, I would have gone insane somewhere like that. The idea of being at school all the time, when I didn't even want to go to school any of the time, would not have worked for me, but it would obviously have spurred him on academically. And even though, as I said, there was definitely some social awkwardness, and he didn't seem at this point to have a great relationship with his dad, according to McCracken, because essentially in the whole 10 years that they were together at that school, his roommate never met his father. Just because a father isn't seen at the dorms or in the school doesn't necessitate that that father is not supportive. A lot of people have a lot of different lives, and a lot of people experience relationships differently, and relationships are two-way as well. So arguably, Guy Jr., who is very isolated as a human being regarding relationships, it doesn't necessarily mean that his father was somebody who didn't care for him or love him. It just means that for whatever reason, during that period of time, they didn't have the closest of relationships. But let's just put that into context, that giving the benefit of the doubt, that Guy Jr. felt that his father wasn't the most attached to him. That could cause problems because we know that attachment issues are very powerful. We know that it can cause internalized rage. It can. And we also know that there was a very Walton-esque kind of feeling when the other girls used to come and spend summers with the whole family. So maybe he used to look at the relationships his father had there, and there was some kind of jealousy or envy, or, as I said, entitlement. So we don't know this is a fact, but this is anecdotal from McCracken. Now, again, McCracken suggests that one of the things that was very clear is that he kind of used to spend a lot of time reading, using the computer, and he just didn't seem to have a problem with self-regulation regarding time alone. So again, another insight. How important are relationships to Guy Jr.? Is Guy Jr. lonely? Or is he choosing that kind of experience? Because it seems to me there was a lot of opportunities for him to be fully connected to his family. And we know that he can build relationships because with McCracken, he has a really close relationship. So therefore, are we looking more at an individual who doesn't feel the need for human company to some degree? He selects those that potentially he requires in the moment and then moves on or alienates whenever he loses the need for them. I'm just posing a theory, but I think it stands up when we talk about what happens later on. One thing I would also note is that even though no other family members used to get in touch with Guy Jr. when he was at boarding school, his mother did. She sent letters constantly. So clearly, a very connected mum, constantly writing to him, constantly keeping him up with what was happening in the family. And to some degree, it's usual that in a family, one person will take precedence over writing to a particular individual in that family member. So when I was away for 3 years traveling, it was my mum. My dad never put pen to paper, loves me dearly, loved me dearly. But at the end of the day, it was her who wrote the letters. What were they going to do? They were living the same life. They're not going to tell me the same stuff, are they? So I didn't get them off anybody but her. Didn't mean that I wasn't loved, doesn't mean that he wasn't loved. And I'm only saying this because it's so hideous what happens, what plays out, that even I, in this situation, am trying to put together some pieces that may make sense as to this parricide event, because it's so disgustingly outside the realms of what we would expect from a son. Guy Jr. graduated from Louisiana School for Maths, Science and the Arts in 2006, and then he went on to train to be a plastic surgeon. So he's a high achiever. I mean, the bar to be a plastic surgeon is really, really acute. So this is not somebody who struggles essentially to succeed. He's an individual who has a great potential. He's an individual who has a real opportunity to make something of his life. And also, just to put it out there are some suggestions and suspicions that particular people who go into medicine may be on the psychopathic spectrum. Now, before you all sign off from any doctor in the whole world and are like, I'm never going to see a doctor again, they're all psychopaths. When it comes down to having an operation by a psychopath, remember, they like to win, they're very cool, calm and collected, and they don't necessarily get stressed by challenging situations. So even though you wouldn't want to be mates with them, it might not be bad to have a facelift by one, because, you know, they'll probably do a decent job and hopefully you won't die on the table. But if you do, you probably won't be that bothered. But nonetheless, it's not the worst kind of traits to have in those circumstances. It's a bit like in HR. if you've got to sack 50 people, it's kind of handy to have a psychopath around who'll just do it without even worrying and then go and have a sandwich. They're corporate psychopaths. So we do see this. In fact, there is a belief that there is about 1 in 25 low-grade psychopaths and 1 in 100 higher-grade psychopaths. So you're surrounded by them all the time. Sleep well tonight. So this guy is somebody who definitely has opportunity to become probably a multi-millionaire. But he never actually worked. So he's been through all of this time in universities, through training, and every single penny has been paid out from his mum and dad. And let me take you back to what I said earlier on about his mother. That job that she had, every single penny was passed over to Guy Jr. Guy Jr.'s mother worked full-time just to support him. So if you think about your own family dynamics, how uncommon is that? We all support our kids, sure, but working full-time and literally giving every single penny to your son, that is complete commitment. And to not be resentful of all the years is pretty mind-blowing, because we're talking about an adult here. We're not talking about a child. We're not talking about an 18-year-old even. We're talking about a grown man. A man who, to all intents and purposes, has absolutely the self-power and determination to be able to succeed. And yet he's just like, yeah, mum will pay for it all. And she was paying for everything. Accommodation, food, car, insurance, everything. And I kind of wonder whether the psychology of the parents is all about that idea that they've invested so much in him. They want him to succeed. He's going to be a plastic surgeon. That's a big deal, right? He's been at the school for the gifted. So in their heads, there's this bias that if they just keep supporting him, maybe he's going to come good. But he's like a vampire. He's just bleeding them dry. Now, by his mid to late 20s, his mother and father are at a point in their life where, firstly, they have been bankrolling this boy through to being a man, and his father loses his job. And instead of just going and taking another job, he does the numbers, he crunches the figures, and he realizes that it might be worth just retiring. You know, he's worked really hard for a long time. He's got a beautiful home, they have equity, and they think that there is potentially a better life elsewhere because they have another home, which means that they can essentially retire to a place called Sirgoinsville. And by doing that, they're going to have their pensions and they're going to have the payments for the house sorted. And that means that they can have a lovely future together. Now, the only fly in the ointment is that Guy Jr.'s mother thinks, okay, well, maybe it's time for me to retire too. And again, they sit down, they figure it out, and they work out that as long as they don't support Guy Jr. anymore, they can live well enough. And by God, they have earned it, right? This guy is a man, a man. People are married with homes and children and careers at this point. This kid has grown into a full male adult, and he's still using his parents' resources. Time to cut the cord. And I'm not being hard on people. I know we all are going to support our kids for the rest of their lives, but there is a difference between supporting and enabling. And that's another thing that we have to recognize. For Guy Jr., he has been enabled by his parents, and enabling is not a great trait to embody in a child, because when you enable somebody, you essentially let all of their bad flaws fester. You let them grow. You get them into a situation where they have entitlement issues. The enabling becomes toxic because essentially they look to you for expecting their support. So it goes past gratitude. They're not like thankful. No, they're not thankful. They're entitled. And when somebody is entitled and you suddenly say, this is actually going to stop, it's not in their frame of reference. It's not even something they've considered. Because as far as they're concerned, ad infinitum, you will be the people protecting, serving, and ensuring that they have a certain standard of living. So his parents sit him down, they tell him, we're going to retire, it's time for you to become financially independent. And this is a few months before he actually murders the family. And it isn't as if when they discussed this with him that he reacted negatively. You know, there's no records of arguments or abuse or threats. It seems to me that he essentially acknowledged the information and quietly went away and then decided that there was a good course of action that would resolve this, and that would involve murdering his parents. But we know that they gave him several months to plan for this new independence, and they would have been thinking that he was probably out looking for work, he was probably coming to terms with the fact that he'd have to be financially independent. But actually what happened was, in that time, he just planned probably one of the most brutal murders I've ever heard about. And I've studied a lot of murders, but this is really exceptional because of who he murdered, how he murdered them, and also the motive behind it. In court, Guy Jr.'s half-sister did talk about the fact that this was family knowledge, that they had, as a family, understood that Guy Jr. was going to be cut off. His father had said he needs to stand on his own 2 feet. His mother had agreed with that, and it had been an ongoing family discussion. This wasn't news that was unusual to the sisters. They heard about it constantly. They were probably really resentful. I would be really resentful, I'm not going to lie. Like, I love my family, but if I found out that my mother was fully supporting one of my siblings whilst I struggled or had difficulties financially, I would be so pissed off, because you want things to be equal. And they've seen this man growing up and still getting that kind of support. And they don't really have a lot of leverage because obviously it's his mother's wage, and that's the blood connection that they don't have with her. So they wouldn't probably have been able to just say, get this guy out of your life this way, you know, he's sucking you dry, because they would have probably felt that was a boundary too far. But obviously when the discussion was brought up, they would have been like, this is a really good idea, cut this man off. In America, Thanksgiving is a massive event. So on Thursday, November 24th, 2016, the 3 sisters all turn up to celebrate Thanksgiving. Again, insight into what that family was like. Clearly very close. These are half sisters coming to Thanksgiving, one of the biggest events in the American calendar. And it's a real surprise because Joel Jr. turns up. Now, that was quite shocking to the family members. They didn't expect that he would do. He was always kind of alienated in that way. As I said, didn't know the kids' names. And even more than that, he was really friendly, he was generous, he played with the kids that he didn't even know the names of. He had a really essentially good time with the family as far as they were concerned. They were really surprised. It was a really good Thanksgiving holiday because, as opposed to him just staying in his room or ignoring people, he actually connected. And I want you to think about that for a minute. You know, when there's been this half brother that you've hardly ever talked to, that hasn't really been a part of your life, and then he rocks up on Thanksgiving and it's like he's the half brother you've always wanted. He's friendly, he's kind, he's hanging out with your kids. It would really add, wouldn't it, the emphasis of happiness to that holiday. And think about that. What is he doing at this point? Why the sudden change in his personality? On one level, we could say, well, he's trying to act like this horrible thought process he's got in his head, these horrible plans in his head, aren't revealed by the way that he's acting. So on one level, alibi orientated, we could argue, couldn't we, that he's thinking to himself, I need to act engaged and happy with my family so they don't think that I'm about to murder my parents. That's one level. But the other level is he relieved? Is he thinking, only a few moments away from doing what I need to do so that I can get what I need to get? You know, is it the fact that actually he's enjoying being in that space, knowing what he's going to do? Because to me, it certainly seems like this is so out of character. There must be some kind of real trigger for that behavior. And of course, alibi-wise, he's looking at trying to suggest there's a closeness, but also that planning. Is he articulating in his mind when he's there what he's going to do, how he's going to do it? Is he there, in fact, to kind of really think out how he's going to play out the murders? So during this time where he knows he's been cut off from his parents and he's going to have to become financially independent, one of the scariest things that occurs is that he makes a book of premeditation where the murders are concerned. And I've actually got the letter here from the book, so I'm going to read it to you, just some of the extracts, so you kind of get a feeling for how premeditated this was. And also when I read it, I want you to consider the language that he's using. I think that's really important. So, minimize things I touch through visit. Note, visit. Odd choice of words, right? Wear gloves and socks to prevent fingerprints and footprints. Drop something down the garbage disposal to break it. Get him, that will be his father, on the ground fixing it. Kill him with the knife. Clean up mess from him before she gets home. Kill her with knife. Maybe dog. So he was going to kill the dog as well. Place her in shower, turn on hot water and point at her to get rid of forensics. Remove her clothes and take them with me for disposal. Again, would you remove your mother's clothes? Is there not like a sacred boundary around the way that you would treat her body no matter what you did? Apparently not. Place him in plastic bag and use it to get him into the upstairs bathroom. Use of him and her throughout. Note that, not mum and dad, so one step away. Cut off arm, plant his flesh under her fingernails, place her hand with his DNA so that his DNA is not washed away by the shower, so wants to frame his father. Use sodium hydroxide to destroy his soft tissue and soften bones for transport. Baste once every hour to accelerate, like it's cooking a stew. Flush sodium hydroxide down the toilet washout bin with handheld shower and then direct handhold into toilet to flush anything out of the pipes and into the public waterway. Douse killing room's kitchen in brackets with bleach. Place hair curler with flammable paper and flammable containers of gasoline in 4 locations. His killing room, her killing room, his bathroom, her bathroom. Wipe down areas near killing rooms and bedrooms. Turn heat up to 90 degrees to melt fingerprints and to dry everything. That wouldn't work. Fingerprints can survive at like 1,000 degrees. Set her phone to text me a message late Sunday to prove that I was in BR, which is Baton Rouge, and she was alive. Leave through the front door and wipe down doorknobs. Timer for flammables set to Friday at 10 a.m. Sunlight masks a fire, not smoke. More at work so they can't report it. Get knives, and above knives he's written killing. I mean, obviously he wants to specify that it's going to be a sharp knife, but that just, again, that specific, particular, get knives with killing above it. Multiple. Get sledgehammer, crush bones. Bring blender and food grinder, grind meat. Again, note how he disassociates himself from the fact that these are body parts, referring them as meat. Get bleach, get plastic bin. Doesn't matter where they're killed, just get rid of bloody spots to prevent evidence of time of death. So don't get blood on the mattress or the couches, in brackets. Get rid of bodies inside house, there and my DNA already there. Flush chunks down the toilet. Get plastic sheeting for disposal process, get hollow point bullets, just in case. Will be seen buying bullets, just use computer room gun, because his father had a gun. Check to make sure that there are bullets, that'll be the last resort. Not the first resort, which arguably would be a lot less painful for his parents, but he wants to go with the knives. And he also notes down that the reason that he's going to do this is basically money orientated. He says that with his father not being alive to claim her half of the insurance, the money is all mine, $500,000 in brackets. Flood the house, covers up forensic evidence, turn heater up as high as it goes, speeds decomposition, bleach reacts with luminol, just like blood, douse area with bleach. Big sprayer, lye, which is known as sodium hydroxide, trash compactor, question mark. Body gives time of death, alibi. Don't have to get rid of body if there is no forensic evidence on the body. Of course, his DNA was everywhere, but we'll come to that later on. There are so many things that I can say about that. But the outstanding one is this guy is not seeing his parents of people. They are objects to be disposed of, and to be disposed of in pretty gruesome ways. I always say, when you are planning to kill somebody with a knife, it is really intimate. It is really personal. You see the life bleed out of them in front of you. You harm them, obviously hideously on a physical level, but it's the intimacy. When you're stabbing them, you have to be really close to them. And I mean, dying by that method is terrifying enough, but dying by your son's own hands, a son that you've supported your entire life, a son that you love, albeit he's got his quirks and issues, these parents are not prepared for the intensity that this man is carrying wise where harm is concerned. Now, one of the things that I want to point out here is that this guy thinks he's an expert. The fact that he's written his entire plan seems to bypass him. So the fact that there's already written evidence by his hand doesn't seem to faze him. He thinks he's got this sorted. Now, as I've said, one of the things about psychopaths is their arrogance. They do think that they are better than the rest of us, and that often leads them to make some schoolboy errors when they are committing crime. Guy Jr. didn't just make one, which is obviously writing his kill list and the reasons why he was going to kill his parents. He was also caught on several surveillance cameras buying the supplies that he was going to murder his family with. You know, he used cash for every transaction, and he did self-checkout most of the time, so he was trying to lessen the opportunity for people to notice him. But everything's on CCTV these days. He bought supplies for the murder as early as November 7. He bought several items at Ace Hardware in Napoleonville, including muriatic acid, a food-grade hydrogen peroxide, and on the 18th he was seen at the Home Depot. He was seen buying the bleach sprayer, extension cords, and a timer. At Academy Sports on November the 19th, so we've got some real planning here, he's seen buying a marine-style K-bar knife. They are really awful to look at. Terrifying. On November the 21st, he's back at Knoxville Walmart buying a plastic blue tote large enough for dismembered bodies to dissolve in. He also actually bought a meat grinder because he intended to dispose of the human limbs, and he got gas canisters because he wanted to burn the house down. It's not the bit that he got to actually carry out, but that was what he was intending. So he was intending to murder his victims and then to eradicate said evidence with fire. And Guy Jr. was also caught just before the murder buying supplies at Walmart. So again, they've got all of this footage of him buying these kind of items. They're not ordinary. You don't go around buying acid and body-sized containers when you're a plastic surgeon, unless something's gone really horribly wrong in surgery and you're trying to cover it up, which we know didn't happen. On Saturday, November the 26th, that's 2 days after Thanksgiving, he starts with his plan. His mum is out at this point. She's gone shopping for essentials, and he goes to his parents' house and he stabs his father to death upstairs in their exercise room. We know that there was probably a struggle. We know because of the fact that Guy Jr. actually gets injured. When you're stabbing somebody and they're fighting you off, obviously you have the upper hand because you have the weapon, but often your hand will slide down the weapon because blood is sticky and it causes that kind of impact. So he actually gets cut, and he gets cut in a way which we know he'll seek treatment for afterwards. Also, there's overturned exercise equipment, so it means that Guy Sr. put up some kind of fight at least, which is awful. It's a terrifying idea to imagine that you just turn there and your son, who you've brought up and loved and cared for, is killing you. And that's exactly those last moments of thought that Guy Sr. would have had going through his mind. He's killing me. My son is killing me. I can't even begin to put myself in that position. We know that he then cut off Guy Sr.'s clothes because they were left where he was killed, and there were 2 really large knives that were left nearby, and also there was a bloodied pack of cigarettes that were on top of the clothes pile, which he was probably carrying at the time. About 12:30, his mum comes back. So Lisa gets in, she literally puts down the shopping. I'll show you pictures of that. You can see that when the police actually came in to find out what was going on, that the groceries are all there on the floor. She goes upstairs, and it's at that point that she gets attacked with a knife. I do wonder whether when she got home, Guy Jr. shouted her upstairs, and so she puts the shopping down and then she goes, because you wouldn't do that ordinarily. The first thing you do is you close the door after putting the shopping down, bringing it in from the car, then you'd go into your kitchen. That's the natural stages that you take. Believe me, as a mother, I know this. But she doesn't, she goes upstairs. So I imagine that Guy Jr. actually shouted her. She then gets attacked by the knife. 9 of her ribs were severed, 9. Her clothes were again cut from her body and left near where she was killed, and by several tubs of sewer liner cleaner. Also, when the forensic pathologist looked at the body, she couldn't identify all of the bodily injuries, and that's because some of the decomposition that we'll come on to in a minute had occurred, but she did note 31 injuries, and she also noted that it could have been a head injury as well. So this was a really violent overkill kind of crime. So the forensic pathologist was very clear that what she could find, even though a lot of the decomposition had occurred because of what he did with the bodies, which I'll come on to in a minute, she had 31 stab wounds and her husband had at least 40. Now, that says something about anger, doesn't it? It says something about rage. This quiet guy who's never really been involved with the family to any degree, but certainly never shown himself to be explosive. This was rageful. And remember what I said about entitlement? When you feel entitled, that entitlement can really quickly turn to resentment. If you think that somebody is taking something from you that's yours and you don't want that to happen, then it can very quickly become a point of bitterness and resentment. And it does feel like that's what happens here. I note from some of the court interviews that they talk about him being quite immature. And again, writing a list of how you're going to kill your parents and the way that he acted around the crime doesn't show sophistication. But I think immaturity is getting him off very, very lightly. I think maybe just a really bad psychopath regarding actually thinking forward. He thought he was so clever that he could outwit people because he saw himself as better. And that's why he does such a shoddy job of this horrific murder. Guy Jr. does go to Walmart to actually tend to his wounds. So he's seen on CCTV around 3:30, November the 26th. That's where Lisa Guy, his mum, had actually been for her last trip. That's where the shopping was from. He gets tape, he gets medical supplies to treat his wounds. Now we know that the prosecution and the forensic made it clear that it would have taken Guy Jr. hours and hours to cut up his parents' bodies. He didn't just stab them to death, he cut them into pieces. He disarticulated and dismembered them. And then he put them in corrosive solutions. And that took him a good while, because by the following day, he had managed to disarticulate and dismember both of his parents, and then he placed their remains in the bins that he bought in the master bedroom. As he had written, he removed his dad's hands. He removed them at the wrists, and he actually left them on the exercise room floor. I mean, this is his father. This is the guy that will have cuddled him. This is the guy who will have served him dinner. And he's cut off his wrists. But it gets worse. His mother's head, he decapitates. He carries her head downstairs. He puts it in a pot basically on the stove, and he eats it. And when they actually look at the forensics of this woman's body, they also know that she looks like she's been hit with force. So there is a fracture in her skull. He has taken these bodies apart like a pro. You know, he's removed their arms, their legs. He's totally disarticulated Guy Sr. at the waist and his mother at the knees. And then he's placed their torsos in these chemicals because obviously he wants to dissolve them. He's trying his best to get rid of the forensic evidence. Remember, he's planning a fire. So he kind of wants to make them disappear to some degree. Also, one of the things that he does to their bodies is he gashes them. Because when you gash a body and then you put chemicals over it, because obviously the skin is something that acts as some kind of protection, it means that if you open the body, it gets in quicker. So the chemicals seep in and that goes into the main cavity of the body, and that means that they dissolve more easily. It creates a quicker decomposition. I mean, Guy Jr. wanted to make sure that his family was completely eradicated, and the injuries that were caused were horrific. You know, when they managed to look at that bit of the body that they could, his father had damage to his shoulder that was so severe that there was a fragment of the knife left in it. Also, he had injuries to his lungs, his liver, his kidneys, just everywhere. It was every single injury that you could imagine. So again, complete overkill. And like I said, what's really difficult is to imagine that his body showed that he'd been fighting for his life. So as I said, again, just that recognition that Guy Jr., his father, was completely aware of what was happening. Another thing that Guy Jr. did was he put the heating on really, really high. He just felt like that would keep the decomposition going. And it's true, you know, in places where there is heat, bodies do decompose a lot quicker than they do if they're in the cold. In fact, the cold often preserves bodies. So he's got it in his head. Remember, you know, he's planned this for a while, that there is an option to help this process speed up. There is a fly in the ointment, however, in this job, and that is that he can't essentially finish the job immediately because he needs to get medical help for his hands, but he does not want to be seen locally. I mean, the fact that he's been shopping locally, the fact that he's gone to his own mother's Walmart where she literally had just been shopping, doesn't seem to faze him. In his head, as long as he's in Baton Rouge for an alibi, he'll be safe. So he drives back to Baton Rouge and then he gets some medical treatment at the LSU student clinic. And he doesn't actually get to carry on his plan because it takes 2 days before he's under arrest. And the reason that he is put under arrest is because his parents, albeit that he felt were very disposable, are not disposable at all. In fact, they are very well loved and very well cared for people, and actually colleagues. So when Lisa, his mother, doesn't turn up for work, after 15 minutes, her supervisor calls her. And actually, Jennifer Whitehead, her supervisor, calls her up to 20 times, according to her in court. 20 times. This is a woman who knows that Lisa would, come hell or high water, be in contact if she was ill. She even calls Lisa's husband, so Guy Sr.'s phone, to check whether he's answering, and she knows something's off. She recognises that this is not the normal behaviour, and she instantly causes the police. It's the non-emergency line, but nonetheless it's the police to go and do a welfare check. And it's very common this. The police will get a call about somebody that should be somewhere but isn't, and they'll just go knock on the door and see whether that person is actually in. That welfare check sets the ball in motion, so to speak. Stephen Ballard and Jeremy McCord, who were the first police on the actual scene, they're looking at this house and it looks empty. You know, it's for sale. So we know that they're moving because they're retiring, but what they notice is there's no real estate lock on the front door, and that's one of those things that is there so that the real estate can come round and show people around the house, but it's not there, so it should be. And they also get concerned because they notice that when they go around the back to check, there is a missing doorknob off the back door. It's been removed and it's been placed on the front door. So that causes some concern. But when they look through the letterbox, they can see that there are bags of shopping on the floor, and they can even see that some of them are perishable items. So instantly, whilst it looks empty, signs of life are there. You don't leave your shopping by the side of the door when you get in, unless something has interrupted that pattern. The other thing that is really striking for them is they can smell something strange. They can smell chemicals, and it's not like it's just off food that they're smelling. They can smell something that doesn't feel right. And what they actually do is they call the realtors. They actually have a conversation with the real estate officer, and they say to them, you know, we need to get into this house. We can't get into this house because the usual lock that's there so you can go in isn't available. And what the real estate agent says is, hey, check the car. In the car, there's often a fob that will open the garage, and the garage will let you into the main house. And that's exactly what they do. So they go into the car, they find the garage door opener, and that lets the police access the house. It's weird inside. I mean, there'll be footage that I'll put on here, but it's really weird. And you're kind of thinking about all angles, what was going through this man's head when he was murdering his parents. Because they've got a sledgehammer on the top of the table, they've got Guy Senior's wallet there, they've got guns, there's also a pot boiling on the stove downstairs, and the stove's been left on, which suggests that somebody is either there or is coming back. And at the bottom of the stairs, there's all the grocery items, and then when they go upstairs, they start hearing a dog. And the family dog is barking because the family dog is actually locked up. So he hasn't gone through with it. He hasn't murdered the dog. Surprising, right? He's happy to burn the dog alive potentially, but he's not happy to actually kill the dog. It always strikes me as strange that when people choose to let an animal live, but people that essentially they should lie down and die for, they leave them dead. It's a strange psychology, isn't it? But then when they go upstairs, the first thing that they see are hands. Sadly, those hands are not attached to bodies because they are Joel Guy Senior's dismembered hands. And then they look in the bathroom and they see that there are bodies in solution. There's sewer cleaner, they've got baking soda, they've got the liquid fire, the muriatic acid, the drain opener, they've got the food grade hydrogen peroxide, they've got bleach, they've got a bleach sprayer, and they've also, and this is the pièce de résistance, it really is, they discover a note in an open suitcase that has the name of the Ace Hardware store, along with loads of information about sewer line cleaner, along with all this evidence that is simply showing that somebody has absolutely planned to the finest detail these murders. And it's instantly obvious that somebody has been planning this. This isn't somebody who's ran in from the street and gone psychopathic on these individuals in a psychotic episode, or some kind of prowler who's come in to steal from them. You know, the wallets are on the top. There is all this equipment in the house. It is clear that it is planned. And I imagine it took the police officers like 3 seconds to think, this is definitely an inside job. This is a family member, without a doubt. Because if nothing's been stolen and the person's brought in all of this equipment, then either one of the victims is the murderer, which is impossible. You can't disarticulate and dismember yourself, or it's someone really close to them. Now, obviously, after the officers have seen this kind of evidence, they remove themselves from the situation because forensics are really, really important. And the forensics these days are insanely accurate. So it's not like the old days where people came with tape and kind of put things around the body and you hope that people would keep the right kind of information so that they had evidence. These days, it's done so diligently that it's almost impossible to get things wrong. So they wear body cameras constantly. They film every single piece of the crime scene, as well as ensuring that they take pictures and as well as they take the evidence itself. So it's so diligently done. And that's basically so that people don't get off with crimes that they shouldn't get off with. It's happened in the past where somebody has got away because the evidence is seen as too circumstantial. But in this case, they are absolutely aware that a catastrophic murder has happened, a brutal incident has occurred, and they want absolutely to make sure they've captured the video. And you can actually watch the initial walkthrough, which shows the body of Lisa Guy and Joel Guy Sr. inside the plastic tubs, which are filled with chemicals. And I mean, there's blood all over the house, which is unsurprising because these are really gruesome murders and the bodies have been taken to pieces. Even though to some degree there is an organisation in the way that Guy Jr. has carried out the murders regarding the equipment, it is really disorganised as a scene. There's clothing spread everywhere and it almost feels like he's at the point, having murdered and disarticulated and disemboweled and chopped into pieces his family members, that something's come over him and he's thought about himself more than the crime scene. You know, you've got to think about that, haven't you? He's thought, oh, these cuts on my hand are a bit problematic, probably need to go and get them sorted before I come back and do whatever I need to do, or before this house burns down. And he's actually thought about himself and gone to do that. And he therefore doesn't get to carry out the final area of crime that he thought would mean that he'd get away with it. Now, one of the things that I said before in the letter that he wrote was the note that he put in about sending himself a text from his mother. He wanted it to look like he was in Baton Rouge on the evening that he killed them, so that he had a tight alibi. So he actually set up her phone to send him a text message. Again, on one level you can say, well, that's quite clever. On another level, you've got to remember that what happens with a mobile phone is when you're driving past any mast whatsoever, it picks up where you are. So apart from the fact that they can see him in Walmart the day that the crimes have occurred, there'll also be numerous connections with the masts that pick up our mobile phone data. So no text message from his dead mother is going to save him from being arrested. Joel Jr. doesn't go back to his parents' home. I wonder whether he's choosing not to go back to the parents' house purely because of the fact that he's giving it some time so the bodies can completely start to decompose. You know, he wants to get rid of them. He has got all of this equipment and consequently he's probably hanging out in Baton Rouge to tighten his alibi, whilst obviously unaware that the police already know what's happened. And the FBI do follow him for a few days. It takes 2 days between the 27th and the 29th. And on the 29th, in the parking lot of his Baton Rouge apartment complex, which his mother was paying for, when he tried to get into his car, which his mother was paying for, he was arrested. And they found in his car a meat grinder in the trunk, a KitchenAid meat grinder. That tells you that his intention was to go back to actually grind the bodies up. Because remember, the insurance policy that was going to pay out would pay out if there was death or if somebody was missing. And what they believe he was doing was trying to create a scene where his father looked like he'd murdered his mother and disappeared. That was the point. He wanted his father to look like he'd disappeared after killing his mother, and then he could claim the insurance. And there was quite a lot of insurance that would have led to him having many, many years without having to work. Because that's what it comes down to, isn't it? He didn't want to work. Now, when he's arrested, there are a few things that he does which are really strange. So basically what happens when you do a crime in a different area, there has to be an extradition. You have to be extradited from that area, and you have to kind of sign that you are willing to be extradited to the place where you commit the crime. He refuses to do that. He lengthens the period of time. He makes it challenging for the police force. Again, what does that say about who he is as a human being? He's just carried out the most horrific, sickening parricide, and yet he's not even willing to engage with the police. He also, during the proceedings, says to the judge, I want you to go for the death penalty, even though he pleads not guilty. Ask yourself where that logic is. But he literally says, I'm not guilty, even though every bit of evidence, even a letter in my writing that clearly says, I'm going to kill my parents and this is how I'm going to do, and this is where I am buying all the stuff to actually do it, and here are the bodies doing the stuff that I said I was going to do with the letter that I said I was going to do it with. You know, he thinks it's probably best to go not guilty. It makes sense, completely makes sense. But on the off chance that, you know, you do get me guilty, could you please kill me? It's a control thing, isn't it? It's a control thing. It's making people try to see that he has got either some conscience, which he hasn't got, or that the judge who is an authority of him is not. He's trying to make it so that he is in control. And we often see this with narcissists and psychopaths. He's definitely a narcissistic psychopath. You know, the entitlement level is there. We know he's been hugely enabled by his mother and father. Not blaming them at all, just saying that enabling a narcissist is not a good thing to do, because they will bleed you dry and they will not care if they harm you. And add to that psychopathy, and you really are in line for some heavy duty difficulties with a human being. And we do know that when the judge actually talked about this case, he said it was one of the most extreme forms of abuse of a corpse that he'd seen in his 25-year career. And the judge actually said to Guy Jr., very similar to what I've been saying, that he thought that Guy Jr. thought he was smarter than he really was, and that the crimes were actually committed in a really unintelligent way. In fact, the judge also said that he hoped he'd never see a case like this again, that was how severe it was. That no matter how long his career lasted, he never wanted to see a crime like that again. One of the things that kind of stands out when you watch the trial is that his defense really don't defend anything. I mean, there really isn't any evidence that's given on his behalf. The prosecution, of course, is very compelling. They've got all this evidence. They've got family members talking about the kind of person he was. They've got his friend McCracken, who he's even had a conversation with whilst he's been in prison. And they've got absolutely no defense, because the defense aren't entering it. In fact, when you watch the defense summing up, they're kind of saying, you've no evidence really to say that this guy wrote this letter, so it wasn't him. And like, I could have done that. That was actually how it went in court. It wasn't him. You know, the fact that he's on video buying all the stuff and you've got the letter in his handwriting, but because you haven't got loads of forensic evidence, because he's totally mutilated and dissolved his parents, that means it probably wasn't him. It's circumstantial. So the trial took 4 days. He was found guilty straight away, and he was sentenced to 2 life sentences in prison. He'll absolutely never get out. He was also actually convicted of several offences, including the abuse of a corpse, but essentially it means that he's going nowhere. It took about 3 hours for the jury to come to that conclusion, and obviously I don't think that an infant child would have expected anything differently. It was in his handwriting, the plan, you know, he knew what he was doing as far as the purchases, and the fact that he had this huge plan that was in a backpack that was in the bedroom where he was staying during his holiday visit showed not only how he was going to kill and get rid of his parents' bodies, but also how he was going to profit from their deaths. So he was absolutely in it purely for profit. He even took money from his parents' bank accounts after he killed them. And he was literally back in Baton Rouge thinking, I'll just sit this one out until they pay out. You know, I'll sit this one out until they give me the money. And even though he thought that he was going to essentially burn the house down, it was so badly thought out that it didn't happen. And because he didn't go back to the actual place to ignite that or to deal with the bodies, there was so much evidence that he was involved. When you watch him in the trial, it's bizarre. He's got no remorse whatsoever. You see him laugh a couple of times, and it almost feels like he's so aloof that he just doesn't register. How do you not register when you've dismembered, disarticulated, ground and destroyed the bodies of your parents? And let me put this into context. Those police officers and forensic found his mother's head boiling in a pot on the stove. A pot that most likely she had served him food from on many occasions. And yet he just sits there, seemingly completely without any fear, without any concern. I think that everybody can agree that this guy was somebody who was very unlikely to change. This isn't a random murder, it isn't a rage murder, it isn't somebody who is dealing with an abusive past, who's trying to set the balance, redress the balance. This is a man who had been perfectly well looked after and loved. This is a man who'd been given everything, including his mother's wages, for such a long time, and yet this is how he repaid them. And he showed no concern. The only time that you really hear emotion is when he's talking to his friend on the phone, McCracken. And I said it earlier on that I think that this was an emotional connection that he actually had. Whether McCracken symbolized something unique for him, whether he was sexually attracted to him potentially, whether their relationship had managed to reach a depth that he hadn't managed to have with his mother or father, I don't know. But when Guy Jr. called McCracken from prison, there was emotion. In fact, he expresses that he's really sad because he's gonna miss that relationship, because it seems that there was something different about McCracken and Guy Jr.'s relationship. You know, maybe it was because he shared his time at boarding school and he was potentially one of his only friends. Maybe it was because they kind of stayed friends throughout as he'd grown into an adult. Maybe it was because McCracken seemed to accept him blindly. Maybe it was because McCracken saw a different side to him, whatever side that may have been. But it's quite emotional when you hear them talking. And I do feel that there might have been some attraction there. It is completely my assumption. That's it. But I just feel there's something unusual in that relationship. Not from McCracken's side. He just seems very disappointed and sad. And actually, he seems like one of those friends that they can see you in your worst moment and still remember you in your kindest. I think that's really important to know, because that says something about him. Even though he's disappointed and feels a deep sense of loss and grief and sadness about the actions, and he's not really surprised either that Guy Jr. is caught for this crime. So whether he also saw the darkness within him, I don't know. But there is something about their relationship that Guy Jr. connects with.
What you did. Assuming it wasn't news.
1 minute remaining.
Oh shit.
Oh shit.
Can you add more time?
I mean, I'm not fully surprised. I don't know. I don't know what to say. All of that aside, I am angry and lost and confused and disappointed and upset and mourning you like your day, even though I'm talking to you on the phone, and I don't. It's taking everything I have to process and maintain my sanity.
I mean, that is the biggest thing here, is that I think back to you all the time. You were the only good thing in my life. All the crap in the apartment. You're the only thing I'll miss.
Another thing I want to mention about this man, and why we know that he is so dangerous, is that when he was awaiting trial, he actually asked if he could be moved to a single cell, because he was having these fantasies about gouging the eyes out of the person whose cell he was sharing. You'd want him for a roommate, wouldn't you? I wonder whether McCracken was thinking about how that would have gone down if he'd been having those fantasies when he was sharing a room with him. But again, it shows that he has this intention. But I also wonder whether it's about him getting control of his situation. He's not very good around people. He spends a lot of time alone. He probably just wants to control the prison situation. Move me to my own space, or I may just gouge the eyes out of my roommate. You can see how psychopaths would use this as an opportunity to control their environment. That is one of the most gruesome crimes I've come across regarding parricide for a long time. If I were you, I would go and have a look at some of the courtroom data, some of the actual case itself, because you will be stunned by the way that he acts. He just looks like he's having a day out and is a bit bored. There are even points where people say that he looked like he was falling asleep. This is not how you would act if you had empathy, or even if you had a vocabulary of normal emotion. You wouldn't be able to. You'd be nervous, you'd be anxious, but he isn't. Like, he knows he's gonna get guilty. He knows he's gonna go to prison. He's tried to control it with the death sentence. But apart from that, he's not really interested in what's going on. He probably knows he's gonna go guilty. He just wants to get it over and done with. And making that show about wanting the death sentence is like some really crass attempt at seeing that he has some kind of conscience. But really, he's probably just not wanting to deal with the vast years that he will be living inside a prison. Guys like him don't always do very well when they go to prison. I hope that you found that case interesting. I'm never gonna say enjoyable because it's not an enjoyable case. I think it makes us think that when we look at our kids, we all imagine, don't we, that there are these little darlings and that we're creating these incredible beings, but sometimes you don't know who's born. And sometimes they're born a psychopath, in my opinion. And then with the right ingredients, we get somebody like Guy Jr. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate the fact that you do. If you've liked this, please subscribe. I release new content every single Sunday. And like I said, if there's one thing I would suggest, it's go and check this out because it's all on body cam, it's all in court, and you'll be able to really get to grips with what happened. And let me know what you think. Was he an entitled, narcissistic psychopath? Was he a loner with internalized rage? What do you think?